You're listening to Design Systems Beyond the Button, where we dive into everything related to design systems for everyone from newbies to seasoned practitioners. I'm Michelle Chin, a design advocate at zeroheight. Usually I'm joined by my colleague Neff, product marketing manager, but today I'm joined by another colleague, Tim, an account executive at zeroheight.
Hi, I'm excited to be here and I look forward to hearing more about the US Bank's design system, how it fosters trust. And, from experience, a design system can be very personal to the company. So, yeah, curious to hear both thoughts on this topic.
Yeah, and we're thrilled to have Beau Ulrey, Design Systems Manager at US Bank, joining us today. Beau brings a wealth of knowledge and experience, and we're looking forward to hearing his insights on design systems. Welcome, Beau.
Hey, thanks. Thanks for having me. I'm one of the design leads on the design system team at US Bank. Trust is really built into our company culture, our team culture, the work we do. So I'm really excited to explore today's topic.
Cool. Thank you, Bo. Thank you, Michelle. Yeah, so today's topic is how do design systems foster user trust? And we're going to explore how that is done at US Bank. But Bo, maybe you can share a little bit to the audience about US Bank as a company and also its design system.
Yeah, for sure. So if you're not familiar with US Bank, it's one of the top 5 banks in the US. And what we've been seeing more and more in recent years is that the customers that we serve, they want to deposit their checks, they want to take care of business from the comfort of home. So our apps and our websites have become really critical for us serving our customers. And in order for customers to use our apps to take care of their finances, they have to trust the product and trust the process and trust everything about that app. So we make tools to help people accomplish their financial goals. Personally, that's a big deal for me. It gives the work a sense of purpose because you're helping people live their lives. Everybody needs a bank account to, have peace of mind, do the things that they're hoping to do, live the lives they want to live. So I'm excited to, be part of a team that's helping with that kind of basic need. And our design system team, so we are the Shield design system. The name comes from our logo and also gets us, into the world of superheroes. And we enjoy that kind of fiction and layer we put on top of our teams. We were established a few years back. I've been on the team for a couple years and leading the design chunk of our team in different ways. The things that we make as a team, we make libraries, tools, guidance for React, AEM, Adobe Experience Manager, iOS, and Android. So those are the things we make and the tech stacks that we work on. And our teams are made up of designers, engineers, accessibility specialists, product owners, agilists, all these disciplines coming together to make the tools that product teams need to create those experiences.
Yeah, I think when it comes to industries that rely on trust to operate, the financial sector is one that comes to mind straight away. And from what we hear is that your design system is a critical component of that and creating and maintaining customer trust as well. There's also another lens to design system trust is establishing trust with the designers, of course, who work for US Bank and use the design system and the developers as well. So in this episode, we're going to talk about both. Um, but speaking about trust, Bo, why is trust so important?
I think it's important, especially in the financial world, because you you have to trust the bank that you pick. Otherwise, you probably won't pick them. So, in order for us to create tools that help people maintain their livelihood, there has to be an element of trust there. There's a lot of aspects to that, like the policies around the products we make, they have to be good. We have to have like a proven record of taking care of our customers. There's a lot of stuff that has to happen definitely outside of the design system world, outside of my own team's work. There's, layers and layers to building trust. But people really, I think what it comes down to, they just have to feel safe when they're using a product, especially with something like managing your money, because that's something you do through like the ups and downs of life. Sometimes it can be a source of stress, and you want your app or your transactions to just work. And sometimes it's a thing that you can celebrate, and that's another good opportunity for our apps to be there in a way that's more celebratory. So building trust, it's something that has to happen over time. It's kind of like forming a relationship. It takes time. You have to prove the things that you've said through actions and consistent behavior. And that's, the root of what design systems try to do. They try to take things that are happening across an organization, systematize them, make them repeatable, make them consistent. So that's, to me, from my perspective, it's one of the core strategies on how we make software that can build trust with customers.
Yeah, especially with such a serious topic like money. It's a really personal thing. Michelle, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think especially with finances, like, and not just like, with banking, but like e-commerce too. You want that consistency and predictability, because when you are buying something and you navigate to a page and it doesn't look like the rest of the UI, it's a little concerning, because I think people are curious, is this legit? Am I being scammed? Did I actually accidentally go to a wrong link? And they might not continue with the transaction because they are unsure of things. So, um, yeah, that design system can really help build that consistency with the behavior and just ensuring that security. Because yeah, money is serious.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like scams involving money are on the rise. So yeah, totally agree with you both that having an app, a website that looks secure and safe and easy to use is definitely important to have. Um, Bo, could you give me some examples of how the design system at US Bank demonstrate that trust?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest examples, and this probably resonates a lot with other design system teams, would be accessibility and how we approach that. Again, going back to the fact that like managing your money is a kind of basic need for a lot of people. Our audience is really broad, and if we create experiences that are not accessible, we end up letting a ton of people down. So we put that into practice in our design system through making components, making guidance that is accessible. It's been tested. We make our test results visible and findable. And then we also give guidance on how to implement the components in an accessible way. So covering how it's built, how it's made structurally, but then also, how it's intended to be navigated by keyboards or different assistive tech, so that what ends up getting shipped is accessible. I'm my Another kind of core goal for making accessible things is that we're saving teams the time there. So if they were going to create that component themselves or start trying to figure out how to put it into their app without that guidance, they would have to solve a lot of those questions themselves. So setting teams up to be more compliant, more accessible, easier to use by default, hopefully builds that trust with the teams using the system. So, you talked about like the two sides of trust. Accessibility is a good way to build trust with our customers, and it's also a good way to build trust internally with the teams that are trying to use our product. So that I think is probably one of the biggest examples.
Yeah, accessibility really
Yeah.
important.
I like your response because I think my immediate go-to would be like everything looks the same. So that consistency is really important, but I think the accessibility aspect really helps crystallize with people that like you all are being inclusive and you all care. So it is like you are trustworthy to, you know, uh to be their bank, which is super cool because it's going beyond just the basics. I love that.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's kind of a stereotypical example, so folks might roll their eyes, but I always think of the example of curb cuts in sidewalks, how making the sidewalk dip down at intersections so that wheelchair users could cross more easily was something that was better for everybody, like people riding their bikes or people who are prone to tripping a lot are finding it easier to get around town. And it's the same thing with accessible components. If you can navigate a form really easily through tabbing, that's something that is going to help a lot of people like get that work done that much faster. So yes, it definitely has to look visually, it has to look right. People can kind of sniff it out if something's broken, or you just kind of subconsciously feel it. But for a lot of users, looking right means the function of it. You might not be a sighted user. You might rely heavily on keyboard navigation. And if those things don't flow smoothly, then it's a lot harder to apply for that account or just navigate where you're trying to go, learn the thing you're trying to learn, whatever it is you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah. And Beau, you said earlier that the design system is also to help the team with building interfaces and the accessible components. Um, how does that relate to adoption of the design system? Is that the end goal, or is it made easier because of the way the design system is built?
Yeah, I think so. Adoption is funny. I've seen adoption getting flack, as far as like a metric that design system teams drive towards. I feel like maybe it's because you can't really control it and it
It's
can be
hard to
hard to
measure.
measure, it's hard to define. But I think it's still a worthy goal, because if you're making a system that doesn't get adopted, that is just silly. So I think there's two sides of how accessibility impacts adoption. One is like we're showing that the things that we make have the strength that they need. They're robust enough to be used compliantly. The function is really solid, and then the other aspect is that we're holding ourselves as an organization up to certain standards through WCAG 2.2. So how you get there is using the latest components that are built to those standards. So that definitely plays into adoption. Like teams need to be operating at that level. So our hope as a design system team is always to give them the tools they need to do that. I mean, it's not going to solve all of the compliance requirements, but it'll get you a good chunk of the way there. And the hope is that, as we update things throughout time, they're becoming more and more helpful. They're building trust. We're seeing more adoption. All of that is going up. So that's a huge goal for our team this year. But the focus is really like, how do we make these things more valuable to teams versus like, how do we get in there and try to force adoption or see direct change there? So it's kind of focusing on like the root cause instead of the symptom you see at the end of the day.
And hoping the adoption will come as a result of that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's like a really good point because I think a lot of times when people and teams are making design systems, you're just so focused on like the libraries, the pieces, and making those available, and that's it. But I think there's a whole other aspect around it, when it comes to adoption and getting that trust. And I think the other thing that's interesting, that the more that I talk to other design system teams, as well as my own experience, is that, you know, people might come from another company and they've worked on design systems before, and they could have had a bad experience. They might not have had a successful experience. They could have gotten really frustrated. So they kind of bring that context in with them. So you almost have to like reestablish that trust, even though, you had nothing to do with the downfall or the frustrations that they had at their previous company, but really helping to build that and demonstrate like the helpfulness of the design system is really critical, for that adoption. Because I think that's a lot of times I see a lot of teams going like a lot of people just don't want to adopt it, and it comes out of their own previous experiences.
Mm. Yeah. So what would be some of the ways that you can really encourage adoption? Beau, do you have some examples of how you do that with Shield?
Yeah, I think so kind of repetitious, but I think the first point is like the product has to be good. So we have to like be accessible. That's one aspect. We have to be the starting point for projects. So we have to figure out what are those tools that teams need, and what are the requirements of them. How do we build that exact thing that teams need? And it's really difficult because you're operating across many teams, different tech stacks. You have very different types of customers. Like you have a consumer opening their first checking account, and you have small business owners who have tons of accounts. They work with vendors. Things are complex. And then you have like wealth customers who are just growing wealth and trying to manage that at a really big scale. So it takes a lot to try to figure out like how to solve for all those different scenarios and make the pieces that can be used really flexibly across the board. And I think some of the baggage around system adoption, especially for large companies, can be caused by the design system team. Um, you only know as much as you know, so decisions are made based off of that. And as you start to learn more about product teams and our customers, I think design system teams just have to be adaptive and flexible, and kind of question decisions and change things, and constantly be looking at how can we be doing this better. So that definitely, it relates to the components, documentation, what kind of tools we're providing, how we think about support, how we think about contribution. Like all of these different processes definitely need to kind of constantly be questioned.
I find that super. I mean, I totally agree, and I find that super interesting because I think a lot of times we might not be so open to questioning things, because like if you
Mm-hmm.
have to think about how, like, okay, we need to get this button component created. We've made a lot of decisions just to get to this one component, and we have like a lot more and a lot more decisions to make. I feel like there's that decision fatigue and not wanting to like handle any more feedback for just because you're just kind of over it. I guess like how have you helped your team be more open to taking in that feedback and really questioning um, some of the work that they've worked really hard on?
Yeah, I think I want to give credit to the team, because I think it's less about like what I have done to encourage them to do that, and more about the team themselves. Like our team is very empathetic, very curious. I think they're on the design system team because they're always trying to find those decisions to document, standardize, lock down. But then they're also questioning, like, well, did we build our Figma libraries quite right? Or could we be using variables better? Could we be thinking about like our doc site, our IA? How could that change? So I think the thing I always go back to is just spending the time building empathy, building understanding of your audience. So it might look like we're going to spend, a couple weeks, we're going to go do research with this particular user of our system. Maybe it's developers, maybe it's designers, and we're just going to learn about their experience. Like, what does their work look like? What are their pain points? What's working well? And from that, we'll learn more about the context of their daily lives. So I think that's really crucial, just as we're trying to create something that is the right tool for the job that teams really need. And it helps us to kind of put past decisions at arm's length and be okay with, changing things because we know it's headed towards the right direction based off what we learn.
Yeah, for
So
sure. I sorry. I think there's like there's an exercise that I like to use if anybody was curious, called the pains and gains exercise, from this book called Game Storming. And it really, puts you in touch with like the user, and you kind of look at what gets in their way, what makes them successful, what keeps them up at night, which it sounds like your team is actively doing.
Yeah, and there's always like a wish that we had more of that happening, but yeah, it's anytime I kind of see us like questioning core decisions, we have to have some kind of research, some kind of input from the user. It can't just be opinion. I think that's where like decision fatigue in my mind is because we're not standing on solid ground. We're trying to make decisions based off opinion, and we're more like pushing and pulling against each other than trying to ideate and learn and understand the problem. So I think it's really key just to questioning those big decisions that people have strong opinions about, which they should have strong opinions, but it's also key to be really open to learning new things.
and talked a lot about the user side and the user research. How easy is it for someone to contribute or provide feedback on the design system who's not on the design system team? How do you actively do you encourage that, or yeah, what does that look like?
Yeah, it's so in terms of feedback, there are a lot of different ways that we're gathering feedback, and it's probably going to sound pretty familiar. I don't think we do anything earth shattering, but we have support channels where people can ask questions. We keep people on rotation. So our goal is to provide answers that are, solid answers as quickly as we can. And that's definitely a source. Like, as we hear what people are asking about, it shows us where the gaps are. And those are things we can document in the future. It's just like a really quick little feedback loop. And it's kind of mutually beneficial. Like, hopefully we're being helpful and we're kind of putting a face on the team, like you're talking with someone. So those are kind of the goals. We have office hours. Usually questions are pretty complicated. So if you have to kind of talk through it, look at designs, ideate together, office hours is where that can happen. And then we just have like a link to give feedback on our doc site, and you can post questions in Figma. You can have conversation pretty close to the repos. So there's a lot of different ways that teams are collecting feedback. We also do early access programs for like if we're making a new component and we know the stakeholders, the teams that need this component, we work with them to figure out what does it need to do, what should it not do, and we'll give them access like before it's officially published and make sure like we're headed in the right direction, it's doing what you need it to do. So that's also like a really critical feedback loop, because we just want to make sure before we publish it, it's the right thing for the job. And now we have to maintain this thing. So if it's too complicated or too difficult to use, we want to know before it's being used more broadly. So that's kind of support and feedback. Contribution is a whole other topic. We are a centralized team, so our design system team pretty much totally controls our components, our libraries, our documentation. Again, we do take like really direct feedback and act on it. But as far as teams contributing components, we have what we're calling, so our design system is the Shield design system. We have another layer called Shield Commons that's built on top of the design system. And that's where teams are contributing, they're sharing reusable things. The commons resources are all community owned and operated. So the goal is you're sharing those things, you're giving value to other teams, but you still own those things so that as you do research, you're able to iterate really quickly. You don't have to go through our team. But there's a lot of interest for our team to invest there with people. So if folks are looking to contribute, we basically have our design system standards simplified for those community contributions. And we're here to consult, to help people create components. We want to help build up systems thinking skills. We want to celebrate when people contribute things and they make their way into the design system. Like if our team brings it in, that's awesome, and we want to give credit and celebrate that. So it's pretty similar to Brad Frost put out an article called the Design System Ecosystem, and it's pretty much that concept. Like you have your design system, you have the layer built on top of that that's more complex. It's owned by the community, and they're very related, like between each other.
Yeah, that sounds super cool because I haven't talked to anyone who's actually tried to apply this more like communal approach, which is it seems really interesting. Um, I guess like how do you find people like adhering to like your guidelines? Because I feel like the one thing that makes me nervous is that some people will like make something that's not really like following the guidelines, like
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
how do you help with that consistency? Or if has it been a problem, I guess?
Yeah, I would say so it has been a problem, but I think the biggest problem, so Commons has been a thing for a few years. And when it started, it was kind of a space to share without many regulations. Like if teams had something they thought it could be valuable, contribute it. Great. You know that, and that is good. The trouble we ran into was then teams looking to pick things up from commons and reuse them weren't sure like how quality is this thing? Is it done? Is it accessible? Is there code? Is it just a design asset? And so there was a lot of hesitation to reuse anything from that space because it was so open. So the good thing was it was very easy to contribute. A lot of contribution happened, but reuse was pretty difficult. So what we're trying this year is to raise the standards a little bit. We're basically taking how we create components for the design system and simplify it. So it is a lot. It's still, very approachable, but it's that step up that will hopefully make it quality enough that teams can reuse it with a lot less hesitation. Um, so that's one of the big problems we're trying to address. Um, the governance aspect of it has been tricky because we don't want, again, our team, design system team, to be a bottleneck. We want to set up the right amount of governance so that it's not so difficult that nobody's contributing, but it's not so easy that we're getting a lot of things that are not really reusable. So we've just been working with folks out in the community who we call library owners, and they understand the system, they understand the standards, and their role is really to look at what is being contributed and work with the contributor to, if it needs to be enhanced, work through that with them. And we also worked a lot on templates and guidance so that hopefully it's easy enough to pick up our template, add your component, format it the way it needs to be formatted, and then contribute it. So our approach has been to kind of elevate the standards and then find the right people to partner with who can essentially govern that for the community. So it's still a work in progress. I wouldn't say we figured it out, but I think we're heading in the right direction. And yeah, we've seen a lot of activity. So we're just continuing to grow that. It's always hard to find time for product teams. That's been one of the biggest problems. But we do see a lot of like passionate designers and developers who go that extra mile and make those things that will help others.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. I think the a takeaway that I think is worth highlighting is that a lot of the stuff can't be done overnight. So I think it's really great
Yeah.
that you're trying some stuff and then seeing how things are working, but also seeing where there might be some friction points and how you can iterate on the process to improve it. And it does take time, and it sounds really cool. So I would love to, like, later on, maybe we can do a follow-up and hear how that's going, because I think it's just like it's really interesting to hear and see the evolution of how a design system, governance process works with, like, more broader contribution. So yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, for sure. I'd love to. Hopefully, I'll have like tons of awesome success stories a good amount of time from now.
And speaking about consistency and reusability, I know that US Bank supports multiple platforms, iOS, Android, web. How do you navigate that with regards to components and yeah, that overall consistency over multiple platforms?
Yeah, I think it has been a tricky thing for our team to work through. Um, the approach we're taking with native, especially, is that we're taking what exists out of the box as far as just components from the operating system and applying our I'm going to oversimplify it like crazy, so if anyone from our native team is listening, I'm sorry, but basically like apply our theme using our tokens, and then look at the features that are there, the functionality. If there's anything we don't need, reduce it. If there's anything missing, build that in. And that's kind of like our baseline components. um, and then on top of that, we're looking at, what else do teams need. It's not just the smallest building blocks. It's also larger pieces. So we've been working a lot with our stakeholders just to figure out what components are needed on top of that and build those. So there's kind of two aspects of consistency when you're on your phone. There's consistency with the rest of your phone. Like, does this feel like an iOS app, or does it feel like an Android app, especially, or does it feel like an iOS app shoved into an Android app? So you want to make sure it's designed for that context. And then you also want to make sure the brand is applied consistently. So that's kind of the balance that we're looking to strike. Like, use what you can get out of the box, but then also make sure that visual layer looks like our brand. So we definitely took a simpler approach. There's definitely, more you can do to customize like crazy, but then your app might start not feeling as much like an iOS app. So I think the team found a really good balance with that. Um, the other fun is like trying to keep updated with all the OS updates throughout the year, but yeah, it's been that balance of, we want it to fit into your device, but we also want it to feel like it is your bank. So it's been a good balance, I think.
Pretty cool. Michelle, any thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, I feel like it's always like, I don't know. It's a question that people, like, teams have to kind of figure out, and like what that balance is. Um because yeah, if you make things like your web app and not like your mobile device, um, that there's consistency in some aspects, but also not consistency. Also, a lot of work. I think I've seen a lot of teams kind of uh, like lean on the side of the native UI elements, um, just because it's easier, but also it has that consistency. But yeah, I didn't even think about all of the other updates to the operating systems and how that means keeping up with that as well. Um, Sounds very stressful.
Yeah, again, I think the team has been very smart. I won't give away too much, but I think a key has been figuring out like what is a good release cycle for big breaking changes, because we don't want to do that like knee jerk reaction every time Google releases a new update to their libraries. So it's figuring out like we want to keep up with that stuff, but we also don't want it to be like a constant barrage of breaking changes to the teams trying to use the library. So yeah, it's again been a good balancing act. Like we want to keep up with the latest tech, but we also have to control how often are we shipping breaking changes and asking teams to go in and update, because that does take a lot of time. And we're essentially asking teams like, put that feature you're going to work on hold, or cause it some delay because you should use the latest components. And that's a tough message to sell. So we have to be um, pretty tactical about like when we're asking teams to do that and how we communicate that, set expectations, communicate the value, all of that.
Yeah, I like how strategic and thoughtful that is because in a webinar that I did with PJ Honori, he mentioned like design systems are all about creating that stability. So, the more stability you can create, the better because design systems are long term. It's not something that you create in 3 months and you're done. It's something that's
Mhm.
in there for the long haul. So, if you were to try to keep up with every type of, you know, UI change from the different operating systems, that can start to be a little chaotic, which I think could even erode trust because it's like everything's changing so much.
Mhm.
I can't keep up. But like if you're being very thoughtful, um, I think that leads to that stability and also that underlying like maintaining that trust. So I think that's a really, really cool thing for people to think about.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I'm curious from like both of your perspectives. I feel like, we as a bank move too slowly, and I wish we would speed up a little bit. But then if you're moving really fast as a design system team, yeah, it can feel less stable. I'm curious, like what other kinds of perspectives have you seen from other teams and other discipline or other industries? Do you get a sense it's kind of the same balance, or are other teams leaning more towards speed and change and iteration?
I think sometimes design system teams can move too fast because they have a point to prove, and they kind of
Mm.
lose sight of the user experience. So, if, for example, I log into an app I use regularly and it looks completely different after 3 months, yeah, it gets kind of confusing. So I think consistency there as well is really important, but it really depends on the sector you're in. I think um, financial institutions might, yeah, work in a different way because it has so much to do with a serious topic like money and trust. Whereas a younger, digitally minded company might be willing to move faster, and their users really don't mind. So I guess it depends on the company and the sector they're in.
Yeah, I've
Gotcha.
seen a little bit of both as well. I almost think that like um it can also just be really, really slow when people are trying to get their design system established. Because I think part of it's like a little bit of the behind the scenes infrastructure of okay, like Figma has released this new other thing, and now we like I guess like the big thing is like, when people could use properties or variables came out, like they were always kind of iterating on like the the behind the scenes logistics, maybe doing some tweaks. But I think it can be kind of dangerous to like keep up too quickly because like, like Tim said, if you go to an app and it's completely different, that can be very jarring. Especially when you have like
Mhm.
a broad user base. Like I know like, my parents when they see a big change, they're like, what happened? And it's just like it's hard for them to have to like think about and process that something like this has changed and things are a little different, but it's still the same. Um so yeah, I think that is an interesting aspect to think about.
Cool. Well, that makes me feel a little better. It almost seems like, especially if you're starting out, that could be something to set expectations with like set expectations around upfront, just to clarify, like our team will move at this kind of pace and here's why. Just so, some teams aren't expecting, variables gets launched and you see variables in a month built right in or something like that, but to just set expectations about like how quickly we move and why do we move at that speed could be good just to get out there on the table.
Yeah, that transparency I think is really helpful. Like nobody,
Hmm.
I think the thing is like people will have questions, but if you have answers and set those expectations, they're not gonna question like why is this taking so long or why can't we keep up. It's more of like, oh, I already know like this is our approach, and I think that also solidifies that trust with the people who use the design system. Where they
Hmm.
can say, okay, I know what the expectations are, I know they're looking out for everyone's best interest. um Otherwise people will kind of form stories in their head of like, why aren't we using variables, and like, I don't know, get a little angry.
Yeah, it's kind of like earlier in the year I read about pace layers, and it's a concept of like the center layer of this spinning planet or something like that is the slowest and it's methodical and it doesn't change very quickly, and that's intentional. And then as you go outwards, things move a lot faster and they become more chaotic. So we've been thinking about that as like our design system is the core. We move slowly, it's intentional. We're not, reacting. We're being more proactive, hopefully. The next layer out would be commons, where like things are shared and owned by the community. It's a little bit more standards driven. There's a little bit more governance, but it's still open to change pretty quickly. And then the outer layers like product teams, and they're hopefully, using both layers, but they're moving a lot quicker. They're innovating. They're shipping things that do not need to be reused at all in some cases. So that, to me, that like was a light bulb moment. Like, oh, I don't have to feel this pressure to keep up with product teams. I just have to focus on like, how do I help product teams do what they're trying to do and move quickly and be competitive, get features to the market quickly. And then as you kind of go inwards, things should get more, more methodical and slowed down. And that's intentional. It's not, like a negative.
Yeah, for sure. I think that that can help with focus, especially just because when you're doing design system
Yeah.
work, you're just like, I do everything. Do I do everything? Like, there's so much to be done, right? It can really instill a lot of like panic and overwhelm. Um, yeah, so I like that concept of pace layers for sure. And like, we have a couple resources that we'll share in the show notes as well. I think we have like about 15 minutes left. Should we jump to some questions?
Yes, I was actually going to suggest that because we have a couple of questions in the chat. Let's start with this one. Beau, does your team ever beta test with real-time users? If so, how was the feedback from that, and how much of that feedback do you take into account with the designs?
So I would say it with beta testing, we occasionally run usability testing if we're making a new component and we reach a point where we're not sure about like which approach to take. We'll create prototypes, we'll test that with users. It's not beta testing, it's more like traditional creating a prototype, click through prototype, getting feedback. it's really difficult to do that and get good feedback about the component itself, or like which piece of the system you're working through. That's really difficult. So I would say the majority of what we base our decisions on is what do our stakeholder teams need, and that becomes our requirements. A lot of the stakeholder need also comes from their research, so we do get that secondhand insight into the user. We also have an experimentation team that's separate that does run things like A/B tests and looks at, like, making small changes. What kind of effect does that have in like how quickly people can get through a flow, or like how visible something is. So we do run experiments as well, and sometimes that shines light on components, like, oh, we tried a link instead of a button visually, and we saw this result. So that can influence how we recommend teams use these in different contexts. But for the most part, that type of like information directly from actual users is coming to us from product teams who are doing those tests and looking at those metrics and running experiments.
Very cool. That was a question by Lebanon, by the way. I forgot to tell the name. Then we have a question from Amy. What tools do you use for allowing teams to contribute to the design system and managing those contributions in terms of prioritizing, communication, etc.?
Yeah, I think like tools for contribution, we make templates to hopefully make contribution easier, that have instructions built right in. So we have a design template that you can follow the instructions, add your component, publish it as a library. We have documentation template that the goal there is, like, as you're looking for components to use from Commons, you're looking through documentation and it's all structured the same. We don't want things randomly structured, and every time you go to a new component, you're like trying to figure out, you get your bearings and kind of read through what is this component. So we have templates for our documentation, and we set up the repos, we structure the repos, and we've got people that can help out contributing code. So I think that's been really crucial, especially this year, just making sure we've got that stood up. Other tools, I think, would just be having, as far as communication goes, like having a good sense of who the right people are to involve in that work. So I mentioned we have our library owners, and it's working directly with them to figure out like what's going on in Commons, what are you working on, what was released, what's coming next. And we want you also to know what our design system team is up to. So a big focus this year has been just like building more bridges, making sure we're doing our work out in the open and we're not duplicating each other. Like if you're working on this component, we're not also working on it, or you're kind of building off of what we're working on and we're doing it together. So just having that space to communicate together has been really huge, and it's mostly been meetings. And we also document in our doc site like who those people are and how we design that process so we can stay in touch. So nothing super high tech, but yeah, we might get high tech. Who knows? We'll see how things develop.
Yeah, totally. Speaking about developers, we have a question from Jesse. I feel like design system teams need to have dedicated developers, content designers, and usability testing to really thrive. That's usually hard to pull off at a smaller startup or a smaller company. What's a good let's do this starter design system team look like to you?
That's a good question. I'll share a perspective, and then I'm in a pretty large team, so I don't think I'm the right person to answer this. But I've really seen a lot of good things happen when a designer and developer pair up and can work on smaller pieces like a specific component together, or work through like our token structure, take a look at like our architecture for our doc site, things like that. Even in a large team, we come across those things where we have to, if we want to move the ball forward, we have to find a very small group who can dig into this question and find a good way forward. So to me, if it's, as bare bones as it gets, it's a designer and a developer. But yeah, I agree. Like, content design is crucial if you want to create things that make sense together and can be used by people, which, that's probably your goal if you're making a design system. You need content design, you need usability testing either in your team or in a strong practice from the teams that you're kind of pulling your direction from. But yeah, that's what I've seen. I'd love other perspectives for sure.
Yeah, I think, like, you really hit the nail on the head when it comes to having a designer and developer pair up. Like, those are kind of like the like basic foundations if you had to start with a very scrappy quote unquote team. But I think the thing is, like, depending on how large your design and dev team is, if it becomes like a communal project while you kind of navigate, um, how you're going to structure components or uh, create them for them to be shareable, it might be good to have like a couple, like a little like kickoff meeting, um, and start from a very grassroots perspective of, like, I guess, thinking about from a more tactical perspective of, as a designer, I need to use reusable components, so I might as well start making some. It might add a little extra to your work, but in time and pretty quickly, you can get most of your components made. And same with the engineering side. If they know they have to reuse something, um, it might be worth spending a little bit of extra time to make the component as part of a library that's reusable and shareable. And then you'll get into a semblance of like a maintenance mode once you have a lot of your components. And then you can start to like refine some of your processes. I think the easiest way is like fitting things into existing processes. Like if you have design reviews or um, developers reviewing PRs, that they are starting to look for certain things for the reusability of some components. Like, you don't need to stand up a small team that has to, suddenly do a lot of these processes. And it kind of can run like kind of how the Shield Commons runs, where it's like a little bit of everyone contributing until you get to a good spot. I think that's a good way to start. And then once everyone starts to see the value, that's when you can start to say, hey, we should actually really start to invest that. Um, I think, yeah, I think that's one aspect. So hopefully that helped.
Absolutely. We have one final question in the chat if we have time.
Yeah.
Everybody okay? Yeah.
Oh,
Jesse said, thank you for the perspectives and insight, everyone. Scrappy teams represent. Final question is from Angelina. How does your team handle brand updates, changing colors, fonts, things like that?
cool. Yeah. And hey, Angelina. Angelina's from our native design system team. So happy to see you here. Yeah. So I think she says, oh, hey. It's a very complicated question, and how dare you? But I think within the design system itself, it is not very difficult. It really comes down to like your token structure. Does it support the way we want the brand to change, or do we need additional tokens? Is it just changing values? That's really easy. If it's something like additional tokens or taking a different approach on theming, that can be really complicated, especially if you're in a company that has a core brand, but also needs to be able to theme for third-party brands. And you have to always be thinking through, if we take this highly custom approach for ourselves, how will that set our partners up? Like, will they be able to theme in this way? will this be a blocker for them? Will it be a competitive advantage for them? We have to think through that bigger picture too. And then the other big layer of complexity is, how do you, like, we can publish that change as a design system team, but then consuming teams have to accept it and put it into practice. So how does that get coordinated across many teams or across like a full customer journey in a way that's cohesive and rolls out together? In some places, there's like really strong tools built right in to make that happen. Like if it's a single app, on like a native app, that can be more straightforward, or if it's powered by Adobe Experience Manager, that can be a lot more straightforward. But if it's something where there's many teams on different versions of components, and we have to work through getting things updated and applied out cohesively, that gets really complicated really fast. So yeah, if it's just a matter of digging into tokens, we can do that all day as design system teams. That's kind of our jam. But seeing it in in the daylight, in customer hands, that is difficult, and you just have to find the right partners to work through that in large companies.
Yeah, that orchestration is really is key, and it's difficult. It's challenging. Yeah, I've been through a couple redesigns, and sometimes it's been sheer panic. But I think you learn from those lessons, and you're like, okay, well, we're not gonna have
Yeah.
this happen again.
Yep. Yep.
Cool. All right.
Thank
Well, we're
you.
at time. So yeah, I wanted to thank Tim and Beau for joining us today, as well as everyone who's asked a lot of really good questions. It was really awesome to hear about how US Bank demonstrates trust for both customers and teammates. And this is actually the last episode of the season. We're going to take a short break. So stay tuned for the next season. And I hope everyone has a great summer. And thanks again, Tim and Beau.